that's where games are good for motivation. A well-designed game will have the right level of difficulty where it'll draw you in, it'll give you increasing challenge, it'll test your abilities, it'll give you new skills to try out, to fail, but then succeed without too much difficulty. When we have too much difficulty, we bounce off. But when we have just enough, we stay engaged. We want to come back for more. And a lot of game design is really good at figuring out what is that sweet spot where we're challenged but not overwhelmed.
So lately, I've been thinking about how we actually get better at the skills that matter most at work and in life. And not the technical skills that are in vogue, but the human and durable skills that never go out of style. Things like persistence, focus, adaptability, judgment, and emotional intelligence. But most of us didn't learn those muscles in a classroom. We learned them by doing hard things that we choose to do. For a lot of people, that playground has been video games. Games onboard us onto new systems. They ask us to read the world, to give immediate feedback, and get rewarded trying again after we fail. And that loop looks a lot like really effective learning. For me, the question is not, do games teach? It's, do we transfer what games teach into the rest of our lives? And that transfer is the bridge that we're looking for. In our interview today, we dig into how to spot real skill growth inside play, how to bring it into work and school, and why these human skills become even more valuable in this age of AI. So let's get into it. Welcome to the Engagement Architect podcast. I am your host, Chris Bennett, and I'm so excited to welcome our guest to the show. Jon Harrison is an author, TEDx speaker, an organizational development expert who blends storytelling with practical wisdom, and he uses gaming metaphors to help people unlock potential. His new book, If Video Games Have Taught Me Anything, is about what all sorts of people he's interviewed have learned from playing games. Jon, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Chris. Appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you end up where you are right now?
The field I work in is organizational development. It's something I kind of fell into. And as a discipline, it's really behavior-based psychology applied to the workplace. It's working with people, but a lot of it is about helping people unlock their potential and helping the organization create the right environment to do that. And I kind of fell into it by accident. I was working in a human resources job and I started getting interested in the educational side of the workplace. And when the two met, I began thinking a lot about how do we make sure the workplace matches what the experience is for the employees. So it all just kind of snowballed until I learned, no, that's actually its own thing. And so here we are 17 years later.
Interesting. And I like the word that you used, unlocking potential. So your new book, If Video Games Have Taught Me Anything, really sounds like a follow-up to your previous book, Mastering the Game. How did this book come about?
So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes we have leftover ideas. If we have a project or something we're working on, it doesn't quite fit in there. That's why we have director's cuts of movies and expanded extra bonus tracks on audio. And so this was the start of an idea. Actually, I had written about 30,000 words of a follow-up book in the weeks that followed my first book that was called Mastering the Game. And I wasn't feeling it. Just something felt off. I actually at one point deleted that entire file. So I took 30,000 words, practically a book in itself, and just kind of threw it away. But I kept a lot of the ideas. And I kept trying with different formats, experimenting. I tried doing a narrative. And all of this came about because when I released my first book, I had a lot of people approach me and say, hey, you know what? I've learned a lot of lessons from video games. Let me tell you about it. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to capture those stories, but from many different people's perspectives? And I finally landed on a format that worked. And then, well, it was about a 10-year journey until we got to where we are today. And we're right at launch now. So if video games have taught me anything is really that 80 different interviews that I have with different celebrities, musicians, athletes, world-class performers, game designers, voice actors, people from really all walks of life that have one thing in common, which is a love for video games and the fact that they might have taken away a lesson or an idea from those games themselves and applied it to real life.
Interesting. Is there like a story or two, kind of your favorite that you could share from the book?
Well, the one I'll share is kind of what made me think that the book itself was a viable concept. Early on in the process, I was very active on Twitter, which was a very different platform than it is today. And it was a great place to interact with others. And I found myself asking public figures that question: what's a life lesson you've learned from video games? And I got an immediate reply from musician and actor Ice-T. And his response was, "You don't respawn in real life." That blew up. People started commenting on it. It became an entire thread. It just really took off. And it got me thinking, there's something here. There's an idea here that we can take and apply ourselves. And so that was one that I still take with me to this day, because that's when that spark was lit inside. And I said, you know what? I think we've got something here. Let's see where this goes.
I want to dig in a little bit to your previous book, Mastering the Game. Super fascinating. You talk about transferable skills. That's kind of the core of the book. Can you talk about what some of those skills might be and how they can transfer from video games to the real world?
That's what I was really first drawn to this concept. I'm very interested in the workplace about how do we create successful situations, what leads to a high performer, what are those traits, those abilities that we try to train. And they fit into different categories, and oftentimes they're what we call soft skills. And they were skills like adaptability, like grit, like persistence, like emotional intelligence, things of this nature. And they were skills that always seem to be in demand. They're, when you're interviewing people, they're the sort of things you wish you could measure. You wish you understood. This person has a great resume, but do they have the ability to stick with a project? Do they take accountability? And I noticed that in order to win in a video game, these are traits you have to display. You have to be persistent. You have to be able to overcome. You have to innovate. You have to problem solve. You have to use your resources, even if that's knowing how to look something up you don't know how to do. These are all different skills that oftentimes are necessary to succeed in a game. Those same skills really are what we need to succeed in just about any job that we work or any field that we're drawn to. So there's an interesting parallel there, but there's also seems to be a bit of a gap, right? So that should lead us to believe that gamers would be the absolute best employees at all times. And we know for whatever reason, we don't always see those behaviors transfer. And so that's why I wrote the book, is I wanted to point out that if we show up to work, if we show up to life, if we start a business using those same mentalities and those same skills that help us win in the game, we'll get completely different results in the workplace. We will see success where maybe it was elusive previously. So treating work, treating business like a game, apparently it works out.
Okay, so what it sounds like you're saying is that in that book, it's not just about video games and what sort of skills can be practiced or learned, but how do you transfer those skills to your job, to your school, to your real life? One thing that struck me when you're talking about this is you were obviously writing that book before AI in its current state got huge. And there's so many conversations now about what hard skills may or may not be relevant anymore, and about how kids are going through school, about how important and how critical soft skills are. Were you just prescient there? Were you reading the future? What do you feel about what you wrote back then, what you've been writing about these stories from all these folks, and what it means for us in this age of AI now? It's a much different world.
Yeah, it is, but at the same time, a lot of these skills, I'm going to use a different term now. We referred to them as soft skills. The term I think is more fitting these days are human skills. These are things that are uniquely human. These traits that make us human, but are also unique to us in a way that even when large language models tend to simulate the appearance of emotional intelligence, but they don't truly display it. And that's one of the reasons why, as human beings, it's even more important that you and I work on things like emotional intelligence, like really things that we used to call virtues: persistence, following through, work ethic, creativity, curiosity. These are uniquely human traits that no matter how good a machine is or how smart a computer can be, there's not really a substitute. And so we still need those, maybe more than ever. In fact, they're really necessary to work with AI tools. And definitely they're necessary when it comes to working with other human beings.
Okay, so I'm hearing that these 21st century skills that are human are not only useful for working with other humans, which makes logical sense, but that it's going to drive us to more success when working with AI enabled tools. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because those who have those innate skills or have built them over time are able to reason with and negotiate through conversations with large language models, which fundamentally they're built on language. But it really comes down to, are we able to clearly communicate? Are we able to express our ideas and our thoughts in a way that the technology is able to parse out our intentions? And if we lack the ability to communicate concepts or to critically think, we're going to see very mediocre results from the tools, which again, it may be functional, it may be serviceable, but there's so much more that we can do if we apply those uniquely human skills and uniquely human traits. That's where we're going to see real innovation start to poke through.
Okay, so talking about concepts, one part of Mastering the Game book that I really like is you talk about how the concepts found in many video games are based on principles and how these principles are not only timeless, but they also have value and transferability. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Where I thought about this was Aesop's fables. These are old stories, they are tales of morality that we find ourselves coming back to them. Things like prudence, temperance, like being able to know when enough is enough. We think about all the challenges we face with our attention being divided and being pulled in different directions. Games can help us train our ability to focus if we choose to engage with them in a way that's intentional. Like anything, though, we can also use them as a very passive form of entertainment. I would say not all games are created equal. There are certain games that will test your limits and cause you to think critically, and there are others that are perhaps a little too quick to offer solutions to puzzles that by receiving those hints early on, we actually short circuit the learning process. We short circuit the ability
Hmm.
to practice some of this resilience and practice some of this determination. But ultimately, the one things that video games allow us is an environment that is arguably safe to practice these skills and to practice these traits, where the real world implications tend not to amount to very much, unless, of course, we're spending too much time. It's a safe space to try out these concepts and ideas, which we know the work world and the world at large is not always offering us that same safety.
That makes me think that video games seem to have this inherent ability to engage and motivate us, like other forms of media may not. You talked about passively sitting back, reading a book, watching a movie. Those are fun, but they don't necessarily motivate us in the same way. Do you feel like that kind of inherent ability that video games have has anything to do with the process of learning from them?
I think it really does. Video games are a learning experience. Every time you or I pick up a brand new video game, there's an onboarding process. We have to learn the
Hmm.
controls. We have to learn what is the in-game system. What's the language? What are the tools? What are the mechanics? What are the limits? And a lot of times we find those out through a process of testing them. There are, of course, games that have lengthy tutorials that will teach you step by step,
Hmm.
and those are good for general knowledge. But most of us who have played a game like that realize that the tutorial doesn't give us enough to really feel that we've mastered it. It's only when we get out there and apply and try things out and experiment that that learning really starts to stick. And that's where games are good for motivation. A well designed game will have the right level of difficulty where it'll draw you in, it'll give you increasing challenge, it'll test your abilities, it'll give you new skills to try out, to fail, but then succeed without too much difficulty. When we have too much difficulty, we bounce off. But when we have just enough, we stay engaged. We want to come back for more. And a lot of game design is really good at figuring out what is that sweet spot where we're challenged but not overwhelmed. That's the thing that the workplace sometimes lacks. Sometimes there's no challenge, so we disengage. There's no measurement. If we don't have a good measurement system in our workplace to know if I'm progressing, if I'm growing, if I'm any closer to my goal, or worse yet, I don't have a clear goal. Video games by their nature present you with goals, and they're very clear about the conditions for success, and they give you great feedback when you're either meeting those conditions or failing to meet them. Again, something that the workplace tends to not always have in spite of its best intentions.
So you're giving some examples of some of the really rich affordances of video games, especially in the narrative sense, which we're starting to see. Over the years, I've clearly experienced a big pushback from parents, teachers, and others. Like video games are little more than kind of a fun waste of time. I'm sure you've encountered that as well. How do you answer that specific criticism?
I think the convincing can happen there when you start to dive into the rigorous research that's been looking at what is the impact to the actual brain, what are the impacts we're seeing longer term, and how it affects us in various ways depending on the types of games. In my book, I cite Dr. James Rosser, who is a surgeon. And one of the things he talks about is this research he conducted that found out that surgeons could actually perform higher quality, faster surgeries when they used a video game to warm up prior to the surgery. There are elements that we can apply it to that are fringe cases, but it also would be a really big leap for you and I to try to build the case that playing Clash Royale on your phone is equivalent to doing surgery, right? It's a different context. What I would invite the critics is one, I would invite them to play some games themselves. And I would probably want to do some curated recommendations for games that are going to be that high engagement, high quality. Unfortunately, a lot of what we see people playing are mobile games that tend to be built around a business model first and then kind of a game layer added on top. So rather than a rich experience, it's designed to provide dopamine hits, and those can be harmful. But there are a lot of other games that provide really rich experiences. But ultimately, if you're a parent and you're concerned about your kids spending too much time on games, I would say sit down there and play games with them. Spend time with them, try to understand what do they like about the game, and then use that as a starting point for conversations. Use that as an opportunity to say, okay, what do you like about this game, and now how can we take some of those things you're doing in the game and engage in the world outside of the game in a way that's going to be fulfilling or enriching, rather than just throwing the game out outright. Let's talk about why you like it and how we can build on what you like about it and add a richness in your own experience. So that's kind of how I approach it when it comes to criticisms of games, because you do need balance. It would not be healthy to do anything for 6 hours straight.
There's this assumption that when kids are playing games, they're wasting time. Okay, so I'm hearing from you in some cases, kids are actually playing games and learning valuable skills, but it sounds like you're also saying that part of the potential of the skill transference involves the parents as well. The parents sitting down and playing the games with their kids so they can understand what they're playing, what the process is. But then outside of the game world, maybe asking them questions, making connections to what's going on in the real world. Do you think that's a critical part of the skill transference or just a useful one?
I believe it is a critical opportunity for parents, especially. As a parent, we have an opportunity to instill certain character traits at a young age. And if we teach them to think critically and to engage with media critically when they're young, is this a good use of my time? You can help build in them a certain skill set that they'll carry with them their whole life. And I think that's a new skill set that we have opportunities as parents in our current generation because of technology, because of media and the way that it is, the importance of critical thinking, especially with AI out there. There's a lot of misleading information, and we have to be able to know how to find quality sources. We have to know how to set healthy boundaries, and again, as parents, it's up to us to model that, and it's also up to us to help lead the way. Now it feels like we actually have to be really explicit with our children. Here's what I'm doing, here's why I'm doing it, and here's why I think you should develop this same habit or trait. And it is a big responsibility back on us. It can be exhausting sometimes, but it's worth it, especially when you start seeing your children walk away from media saying, you know what, I liked that and here's why. Or I think I can use something I learned from that. I'm going to treat my lesson that I'm studying for in my biology class, I'm going to treat that like a side quest from a video game, and I'm going to try to make it a little more fun.
Part of mastering the game discusses the concept of kind of not quite gamification. For our audience, could you describe what gamification is and why you feel that learning from video games is markedly different from that?
The term gamification, it's still around, and there were a lot of organizations, ones I worked for, ones I worked with, that wanted to take this idea of how do we gamify work? How do we add the points system, the badges system, leaderboards, right? These were hot topics that if we could just make work like a video game, everyone would want to show up to work. They'd put in extra hours. It would be fun. We'd all win. And there's been pushback to that. What makes video games great and engaging is that we choose them. I choose to play a game, and if I don't like a game, I choose to set it down and choose a game to my liking. So gamification, as at its core, this idea of taking game mechanics and what makes games games and applying them to a non-game situation like the workplace. It's a sound concept if everyone wants to play. But if I don't want to play, then the game's going to fall apart. And gamification is really fragile in that way. I think video game learning is different because my recommendation is parallels, allegory, metaphor, or skill sets that I talked about them as transferable skills. I think mindset is a skill. I think attitude is a skill. And the things we mentioned earlier, emotional intelligence, persistence, grit, adaptability, innovation, these are all skills. And when we can make that jump from what works in a game setting to works in a non-game setting, I think that's where we can start to see some growth and we can start to see some success. And I would just encourage anyone listening, try it out. If there's a task you have that seems to be a little frustrating or uninteresting, think about games you like and what about the game is interesting, and try to see if there's something about that game you could lay on top of the actual task or thing that you're not loving.
So here's a question I asked to all of my guests. What do you feel the future of engagement and motivation is? If you put your hat on and think positively in the future, what do you see on the horizon?
What I see on the horizon in the short future, it's interesting. And I believe where we are with artificial intelligence and where we are in our current environment, I believe we're going to continue to shape towards this idea of very customized, very curated experiences around our own growth. We've seen that happen with Netflix, with the recommending you movies, or YouTube, the algorithms that build that. What would be absolutely wonderful is we can tap into those same sort of concepts, but build it around motivation and engagement. So, provided the right guardrails, the right safety, I think incredible things can be done in that world. But the challenge with a lot of the algorithm is it tends to respond to what we engage with rather than what's necessarily going to be best for our own motivation. And so finding ways for technology to protect us against some of that negativity in spite of our natural tendency to dwell on that is going to be a real key opportunity to help with engagement, whether it's in work or whether it's outside of work.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation and really want to encourage folks to check out the new book that you have coming out very soon.
I appreciate it. And I think these are incredible questions. And I love what you're doing here. I think all of us, when we invest in our own engagement, we're all better for it.
What landed for me with Jonathan is how deliberate skill transfer turns entertainment into development. Games give us a low stakes training ground where we can practice courage, focus, and adaptability, and bring that into real moments that matter. The move here is simple. You notice a skill, you name the tactic, you set a tiny real world quest, and get feedback. Do that loop a few times and you've got momentum. In an AI-driven world, the tools can generate options, but humans still choose goals, manage emotion, negotiate trade-offs, and persist through uncertainty. That's where durable skills really shine. So try one thing this week. Pick a specific moment from a game you play or used to play. Write a one-sentence lesson and one tiny quest for tomorrow. Share it with a friend if you want accountability and keep the game going. Thanks for listening to the Engagement Architect podcast. If this sparks something, pass it to a parent, a teacher, or a manager who cares about real skill growth. And I'll see you next time.